a certain city in the heart of Africa, a beautiful teenage girl named Samantha had just completed her secondary school education. Samantha was her mother's only child and her father was late, thereby making her mother the only one she had. Samantha's mother, Eunice, loved Samantha more than anything in the world. She was a businesswoman and she did everything within her powers to give Samantha a good life and also bring her up to be a responsible child. Samantha was also very intelligent and always made her mother proud. At the end of every school session, she would come home with many awards and gifts, making Eunice, her mother, happy and grateful to God. Growing up, Samantha had no close friends as she was always with her mother. The only friends she had were the ones she interacts with at school. Eunice and her daughter were living like two best friends, and after her daughter's high school, they were both seriously planning for her to further her education. Samantha too was eager to start her new life, but little did she know that fate had other plans. One day, Samantha attended her friend's birthday celebration and there she met a handsome young man named Brian, and it was love at first sight. Brian was a guy of 25 years while Samantha was just 18. Brian, on seeing Samantha, approached her and offered to dance with her. They danced and laughed together, exchanging sweet glances that left Samantha smitten. Before Samantha left the party, Brian took her number and from there, they began to communicate with each other. Brian told her how he fell in love with her the very first day he saw her, and how his love for her kept growing. Samantha, being a little teenage girl, was carried away with all the sweet talks, and all she thought about every day was about Brian and how her heart beats for him. As time went on, Samantha's closeness with her mother began to dwindle.
Most of the times, she was either in her room chatting with Brian, or she was on her own imagining herself and Brian together. Even when her mother tried to have conversations with her as they used to do, sometimes she would notice that Samantha was not listening to her, rather, she would be checking her phone from time to time. Samantha's mother, Eunice, was not comfortable with the whole change and she decided to call her and talk to her. Eunice asked Samantha if there was something bothering her and the reason why she had been keeping away from her, but she answered and said that she was fine, that she was only preparing for her exams. Her mother simply nodded and told her to go back to her room. But she was not satisfied with Samantha's response. She knew that there was something odd about her recent behavior. From that day, she began to monitor Samantha's every move. She would peep through Samantha's door expecting to see her with her books, but Samantha would be busy with her phone and smiling. Eunice would watch her for a while, shook her head and then go back to her room. She also noticed that sometimes, while Samantha would be in the kitchen cooking or washing the dishes, she would occasionally leave whatever she was doing and go to her phone. One cool evening, while Samantha was taking her bath, her mother went into her room and decided to feed her curious mind. She took Samantha's phone and began to go through it. She was shocked when she saw her daughter's text messages and chats with Brian and how Brian had been telling Samantha to visit him, but she told him that her mother would not let her and Brian was telling her to lie to her mother that she was going to a friend's house so they could study together. Eunice felt really displeased and she couldn't wait till the next day to talk to Samantha about it. She waited for her to finish taking her bath and when she was done, she called her in her room and began to ask her who Brian was. Samantha told her that Brian was just a friend and there was nothing serious about, but Eunice refused to be deceived. She told Samantha that what she saw was beyond being ordinary friends. Samantha tried to cover things up and defend herself, but not wanting to hear those lies from her again, her mother told her to cut every ties with Brian. She told Samantha that she was too young to engage in all that and it would only distract her from her studies and future plans. She gave her a serious warning to stop the communication with Brian. After they were done talking, Samantha went back to her room, looking sad and angry. She had grown to love Brian so much and it would be really difficult for her to let him go. She picked up her phone and called Brian, telling him all that her mother had said, and Brian told her not to panic, that they can still do their things without her mom knowing about it. He further told her to act matured, and they would only call each other whenever her mother was not at home. Samantha was happy after hearing what Brian had to say. She agreed to what he said and was ready to do anything to protect their relationship. Samantha and Brian kept talking in secret, and it even grew to the point where Samantha would sneak out of the house to visit her lover. Brian had promised her heaven and earth, and she was convinced that this was the man for her. While all these were going on, Samantha's mother was fully aware but was just looking for the right way to approach the matter. But when their relationship blossomed, she grew concerned. She warned Samantha that she was too young to be in a serious relationship and should focus on furthering her education. But Samantha refused to listen, convinced that Brian was her soulmate. Eunice, seeing that it was fruitless trying to convince her to do otherwise, she then told her that if Brian was really serious about her, she should tell him to come and see her. Samantha agreed, and the next day, she went to Brian and told him to come and see her mother, but Brian refused, telling her that it was not yet time for that. Samantha pleaded with him to go with her just to prove to her mother that he meant no harm, but Brian flared up and told her that she can't pressure him, that when the right time comes, he would come and see her mother. Brian was overly angry and told Samantha that if she can't defend their love, it means that she doesn't trust him and doesn't value their relationship like he does. Brian stated that if she insisted that he must come and see her mother, then their relationship was over. Samantha immediately began to play with him, telling him that she was sorry. And when Brian became calm, she reassured him of her love and promised to go back home and talk to her mother. They spent some time together, had fun, and she then went back home. When she returned, her mother was already home, eagerly waiting for her to return. It had been over 5 hours she left the house, and she had been calling her on the phone, but she refused to pick up. Immediately she stepped foot into the house, Eunice began to scold her, telling her how irresponsible she had grown, and the part that annoyed her the most was that she trained her better than what she had turned into. Later, she asked her when the so-called Brian was going to come and see her, and Samantha told her that Brian was not going to come. Samantha told her mother to stop getting worried over nothing, that Brian loved her and he would come when the right time comes. Eunice was upset like she had never been before. She gave Samantha a very hot slap and seriously warned her to stop seeing Brian, that he was not real, and instead of Samantha to apologize, she flared up and for the first time, she raised her voice on her mother, telling her that she was trying to frustrate her life and make her life boring. Allow me to live my life, Mom. I'm old enough to know what is good and what is bad. I love Brian and he loves me too. If you really care about my happiness, then let me be, she said to her mother at the top of her voice, and after that, she walked out on Eunice, straight to her room. Eunice was speechless and wondered if this was the same Samantha she gave birth to. Her tears threatened to fall, but she held it back and went to her room to think of what to do. From that day, Samantha's relationship with her mother became sour. She began to talk to her mother the way she liked, disrespecting her in any way possible, with the feeling that her mother hated her and doesn't want her to be happy. She no longer takes permission from her mother before going out to visit Brian or even hide to answer his calls. Eunice was heartbroken and she tried everything to separate them, from sitting her down and talking to her calmly, to restricting her movements, but Samantha's love for Brian only grew stronger. Eunice went to the extent of taking Brian's number from Samantha's phone to call him, but immediately she told him that she was Samantha's mother and needed to talk to him. Brian hissed and hung up the call. Eunice thought it was a mistake. He called him back several times, but he didn't take his calls. As days passed by, things began to get out of hand. Samantha would leave the house and stay for days at Brian's house without informing her mother. Eunice got fed up, and one day, Eunice presented Samantha with an ultimatum to choose between her mother and her boyfriend. Samantha, blinded by love, chose Brian. Heartbroken, Eunice reluctantly accepted Samantha's decision. Samantha left her mother's house to live with Brian, who promised her a life of happiness. Eunice was in tears and heartbroken. She never knew that Samantha would do such a thing to her. Brian welcomed Samantha and promised to give her everything she wanted. They began to live together, and living with Brian was what Samantha had always dreamt of. She forgot everything about her studies, including her dreams of becoming a banker. She occasionally remembers her mother, and couldn't deny the fact that she missed her. Samantha and Brian lived together for 3 months. Initially, everything between them both seemed perfect. But soon, Brian's true colors began to show. He became possessive, controlling, and violent, maltreating Samantha in ways she never imagined. Samantha thought it was just a phase that would pass soon, but it wasn't getting any better at all. She also noticed that Brian was also seeing other women and it was heartbreaking to her. As the months passed, Samantha became pregnant, and Brian's behavior wasn't after he told her to get rid of the baby and she refused. Brian told her that he was not ready to be a father and if she refused to get rid of the baby, then she should find a way to fend for herself. Not just that, Brian told her that he doesn't want someone who was as wayward as her to carry his child. Samantha cried, thinking it was a joke, but Brian meant every word he said. Brian stopped giving her money or attending to her needs as a pregnant woman. She realized too late that her mother had been right all along. In order not to die of hunger, Samantha began to sell sachet water along the road to be able to feed herself and her unborn baby. She would leave the house in the morning and come back in the evening, but the worst of it all was that Brian would collect all the money she made that day. He would also beat her and send her to bed in an empty stomach. Samantha had pleaded with him to tell her if she had wronged him in any way, but Brian would tell her to her face that he should get rid of the baby, that someone who had the mind to leave her mother cannot bear his child. Samantha would go to her room, crying and blaming herself for everything. If she had listened to her mother, she would have been in school by now. One day, exhausted and broken, Samantha gathered her courage and returned to her mother's house, pleading for forgiveness. Eunice was not surprised to see her looking old, hungry and dirty. This was the daughter she was working so hard just to give her the best life. Eunice, seeing her daughter's tears and bruises, welcomed her back with open arms. Together, they worked to rebuild Samantha's life, and when the child was born, they raised him together. Samantha learned a valuable lesson about the importance of family, education, obedience, and wise choices. She realized that true love doesn't hurt and that her mother's guidance had been a shield against the harsh realities of life. When her child came of age, she went back to school, and from that day on, Samantha dedicated herself to her studies and her child, becoming a successful banker and a proud mother. She never forgot the lessons of her past and always cherished the love and wisdom of her mother, Eunice.